So
you see
everyone
the,
was disappointed,
you can
but
hear
then
people.
we
You
got
see
this.
the big sword, and people are starting to realize what it is. That's
yeah.
You can hear people. You see the big sword, and people
Even
are starting to realize what it
there,
is.
like, if you know Final Fantasy
right.
7,
That's
you're gonna
fun.
recognize
Even
that.
that
So,
playground
yeah,
there, like, if
it's
you
kind of
know
very
Final
slowly
Fantasy 7, you're
dawning
recognize
throughout the
that.
audience.
So,
Yeah, I think most of them
it's kind of very
really
slowly
like Final Fantasy 7 knows what it is
throughout the audience.
recognizing
I think
the
most
name,
of them who
yeah.
really like Final Fantasy 7 knows what it is, right?
They don't start with Cloud.
Yeah, this is when everybody really knows. They don't start with Cloud.
You weren't aware.
Right.
This is when everybody really knows.
A very casual fan, someone who's never played Final Fantasy
even
before.
if you're like a very casual fan, someone who's never played Final Fantasy before.
Slight chills. Okay. I've got a slight chills, Mike. Slight chills. What is this,
and I know
Mike?
you're not a weeb like I am.
It's a Super Smash Brothers Mega Man trailer.
Oh, this is the most
Super
excited
Smash Brothers
I have
Mega Man
ever
trailer.
been from
Oh,
E3.
this is the most excited
I love
I have
Smash
ever
Brothers,
been
but
from
Mega
E3.
Man is my favorite video game
I
character.
love Smash
And this was
Brothers,
back when
but
there were
Mega
very
Man
few
is my
third-party
favorite
characters.
video
Like
game
this point right
character.
here, like I
And
knew
this was
it
back
was
when there
from
were
that.
very
Yes.
few third-party
I
characters. Like this
lost
point
it,
right here,
Jeff.
like I knew it
I
was from that. So
Yes.
you can ask my brother because I was watching with him. I absolutely.
You can ask my brother because like I play a ton of Smash Brothers.
I absolutely
literally
flipped
character
out.
I would
Like,
won
I
in
play
that
a
game
ton of
the
Smash
most.
Brothers.
At this point, there was no indication
the
that was
character I
gonna
would have won
happen.
in that
We had
game
only
the
gotten
most. At this point, there was
Snake
no indication
and
that was
Sonic
gonna
as
happen.
third-party
We had
characters
only
at this
gotten
point ever in the
Snake
series.
and
They were
Sonic as
stealing all his
third-party
great
characters at
moves.
this point
It's
ever
incredible
in the series.
remix version of Mega Man 2 music.
Ah,
It's incredible remix version of
This
Mega
is still
Man
the
2
best
music.
Mega Man has ever looked like, by the way.
Beautiful
It's this, like,
CGR.
Smash
This is still
version
the
of them.
best Mega Man has
The kind
ever
of,
looked like,
like,
by the way.
It's
This
it,
like
Smash
captures the
Bros. version
proportions of the
kind of
8-bit
sprite, like it's kind of
it like captures the
staunchy.
proportions of the 8-bit
Mike,
sprite. Like it's
I'm
kind of
sick of hearing about things that you
staunchy.
love. If you're not gonna bring anything that I love, things that you love. Okay. If you're not gonna bring anything that I love, all right, maybe this might do it for me. All right. This might be my. Maybe this might do it for me. Favorite moment from any E3 ever. This might be my. Favorite moment from any E3 Legend of Zelda fan. And I've been a long time Legend of Zelda most important franchises. But I also agreed with the assessment that they needed to change things up. And when they said they were going to change things up, and they delayed Breath of the Wild, change things up. We found a new way of doing things for things up, and they delayed Breath of the Wild. Because we found a new way of doing things. Released this trailer. I didn't really believe it. I was just all in. And then they released this trailer for anything, and I was just all in. It might be the best trailer for anything. It's almost just like good filmmaking. This trailer, honestly, this. It's almost just like good filmmaking. This trailer, like they know, like
Here we go. Oh, here he's gonna laugh. The bird's gonna laugh. I love it for some reason. Oh, here he's gonna laugh. The bird's gonna laugh. I love it for some reason. What? It's really good. Here it comes. I think about that all the time. I don't know. Just it's the way really they frame that in that song. It gets me pumped up all the time. Here it comes. The way they frame that in that song, it gets me pumped up. Like, yeah, here it comes indeed. That's great. That is so good.
Oh, this boy. This is a big boy, Mike.
This is a pretty short clip here.
Oh, this boy.
I think
this is a big boy, Mike.
This is a pretty short clip. It's not just about video games, know it Jeff, and trailers and demos. It's not just about video games, personalities, trailers and demos. The emergence it's just about the Reginator personalities. This was like the emergence
I'm gonna hit play.
of the Reginator from 2004.
I'm gonna hit play. I'm very excited.
My name is Reggie. I'm about kicking ass. I'm about taking names. My name is Reggie. I'm about making games. I'm about taking names. And we're about making games.
For those who don't know, Reggie invented the Bigfoot pizza, I think. So, of course, for those who don't know, Reggie invented the Bigfoot pizza, I think. So, of course.
For those of you who don't know, I thought you were going to talk about how important Reggie was for video games. For those of you who don't know, I thought you were going to talk about how important Reggie was for video games.
I think it was the Bigfoot, and I don't think he invented it. But whatever. Yeah, his name's on the Bigfoot, and I don't think he invented it. But whatever. Yeah, his name's on the back.
No, he was in his
I got it. I cracked it.
All right, before people get mad, we better do something.
Like, I got it. I cracked it.
If ever there was a sequel that was anticipated, it was Halo 2. If ever there was a sequel that was anticipated, it was Halo 2.
This is the game that made me get an Xbox. I got an Xbox for Halo 2. This is the game that made me get an Xbox. I got an Xbox for Halo 2.
The only thing people didn't like about Halo 2 is the ending, right? The only thing people didn't like about Halo 2 is the ending,
Spoiler
right?
warning. Right, yeah. 2021. Spoiler warning.
And I think, especially at this point, this kind of long, uninterrupted, and I think especially at this point, this kind of long, maybe a uninterrupted, more unusual, right? I think this is what popularized that, maybe a little bit more unusual, right? I think this is what popularized that with Sony. They have a pretty long, like 2004 demo. That's basically the same kind of format. They have a pretty long, play a long level from the game demo. This is E3 2007, and it's kind of hard to believe now, but this was the E3 where Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was the belle of the ball.
Yes.
Like, like Call of Duty is the biggest thing in the world right now, and still is, and people are excited about it, but it maybe isn't like a showpiece for the show anymore, because a lot of those people are, again, they're hoping for something more surprising than here's the next Call of Duty. At this point, this was really Call of Duty hitting its stride. Like that moment right there, people freaked out about. People talked about that all show. You did not see that guy in the tall grass till he got up, and that absolutely destroyed people's brains in 2007. But you know, Jeff, it's not just about gameplay demos and executives. Sometimes celebrities could even make their way into your heart.
Man, this really was a moment, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, everyone loves Keanu Reeves. I'm not one to gaga and go over celebrities, but this is pretty neat.
And remember crowds? He seems to be very interested in the game that he was making. So that's kind of all you can ask for from a celebrity, right? Just come, don't talk down, seem like you're enjoying yourself, maybe even actually enjoy yourself, and people will respond to that. And also, you know, kind of be Keanu Reeves. That helps a lot.
You think they're going to bring him out this year to have him apologize? Yeah, that's pretty great. Why don't we go back again, though, pretty far back to E3 2000 to see what was, gosh, I was pretty young at this point, but I remember thinking this is the most excited I think I've ever seen people be for a video game. Like, this seemed like it was by far the biggest deal in the world at the time, and it's Metal Gear Solid 2.
And Metal Gear Solid was such a big deal. It was, I mean, probably the best PlayStation game. Getting the sequel on PlayStation 2, seeing all this stuff, and just, yeah, it just looked so good, so cinematic, yeah.
So you have to understand, like, at this point, the fact that we're seeing raindrops, like, bouncing off of objects, and we're seeing this, like, these light bloom effects, like, this was all pretty nuts at this time. This
Yeah, games just didn't look like this before this point, and it was this, you know, perfect storm of the best artists in the world working with the best technologists in the world to make a video game. Yeah.
All right, Jeff, you want to close this out with maybe the first E3 moment?
I do.
Back in 1995, again, the first E3, and this was Sony's big moment. It was following Sega's little show about the Saturn, and their surprise that it's out now, which just confused everybody. And this is how Sony responded as they were getting ready to launch the original PlayStation.
I want to ask Sony Computer Entertainment President of America, Steve Reyes, to join me for
a brief. This guy right here had just given a long, boring presentation, and he did that on purpose to really emphasize what's about to happen right here, where Steve Reyes is going to come out and say one thing.
$299.
Got chills there a little bit because that's it right there. This is them understanding immediately. This is PlayStation, not out yet. Sony, not really in video games yet, especially not as a hardware company. But they already understand how to do this E3 show, come up and make a huge impact. It's kind of unbelievable. And it was the rest is history, right? Like Saturn had to bow out because the Saturn was too expensive. Sony knew that. They undercut the price by $100. And then every time Sega would respond, PlayStation would lower the price until Sega just couldn't keep in the business anymore. And they tried a few other systems after that, but it was you know, the writing was on the wall at that point, and it all happened right there with PlayStation understanding how to play this E3 game. It's, yeah.
See, there's all sorts of fun. I didn't even talk about giant enemy crabs and you know, weird Elder Scrolls 6 announcements years before we'll ever see it. But there's all sorts of fun stuff, Jeff. Imagine all the fun stuff that's happening right now and what will happen in the future. So just admit it, Jeff. Admit that you love E3.
All right, I'm a fan. I admit it. I'm not just a games journalist. I like games too. Don't tell anybody.
No, we're telling everyone.
Okay.
I'm calling your mom, calling your wife.
All right, that's going to do it for us, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the show. I hope we didn't keep you too long. And if you tuned back and you're just getting here right now and you're confused, good.
Yeah. We don't
deserve us. I hope your favorite game gets announced next. I'm sorry. All right, everybody, have a good one. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Mana Ikeda, and I currently work for a Japanese video game company called Artplay as the current art director. And previously, I worked on Bloodstained Ritual of the Night as the communications manager, and I also drew the box art. So that's just kind of a summarized version of myself. I always thought I was going to be an illustrator, like just a freelance illustrator from start to the end. Art was my passion, and it still is, but I always wanted to try something new all the time. Anything that I was interested in, like comics, video games, just anything in general. For me, art directing is something that improves the overall gameplay, and and also the game designer will know, like, oh, there was these kinds of ideas, because when I started to do this job, like, they didn't really have an idea of what they really wanted to do visually. So it's basically like, oh, I want to make this kind of game, but I don't know what it looks like. And for me, that's where I come in and kind of help them kind of fill that in. I started as a fan, and I really wanted to, my artwork was very inspired by the games that they created in the past. So at that point, I knew what I wanted as a fan. And with Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, it was a game that's based on gothic horror, and the past, and the people that were working on the past Castlevania games were working on. And for me, I was a huge fan of Castlevania and the gothic feeling of that entire series. And I haven't seen a lot of games that were like that, and it was very unique. And since my artwork was inspired by that kind of game, I drew a lot of those kind of dark horror game kind of style. I was someone who knew from a very young age that I wanted to be an artist and do this specific type of work. And even though I didn't really know, or I had one specific goal, I still struggled to do so. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, because they wanted to be something like a specific job they want, and they can't achieve it, even though they try really hard. And for me, I think that's totally fine, and they should try something else that's new. Because if I didn't take this chance of becoming a communications manager and also the translator for the company, I wouldn't have been in this art director position at all. I would have been like, I would be like, no, I want to do art as a career. I'm not going to take this translation job. And I still, to this day, be a freelance artist taking on these mundane work that, that I had no art direction whatsoever in. And so I feel like for those who are struggling and, thinking of quitting their passion job, because it's, like, if you're working on something that you're very passionate about, you get very emotional about it. And I'm sure a lot of people feel very down when things don't go right, or things that they're worried about, doesn't get resolved doing the same kind of work over and over again. So I feel like for those people, like, in a very similar situation as when I was struggling as an artist, I feel like they should try something else that's new. So for me, video game was like my second passion, and I really wanted to be involved in some way. So I decided to take on that job and be a translator. But in the end, people, when you're very passionate about something, people recognize that. And I was both passionate about video game and art. So in the end, I became an art director that I never thought I would be able to do. So I feel like for those people, take the chance, even if it might not be something that you really want to do as an end goal. You should take the chance if it does change your career.
Great stuff there. Of course, remember, video games are so much more than just making them and having that kind of thing. You could do anything and be involved in video games. And so if you have the passion, the drive, the determination, you can make your dreams come true and have some kind of job in the video game industry. Also, of course, before that, there was a Jeff Grubb GamesBeat thing. I was told behind the scenes that it didn't play, that it was a joke. Jeff Grubb is not a terrible person. He's just extremely old and shouldn't be listened to. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you, don't forget to check out e3expo.com/shop for limited edition E3 apparel like this. Because you might be saying, I'm having a great time watching you do this, Greg. Man, if only I could commemorate it in a way that I could wear all the time when I go to the old baseball games or the sock hops. Because you're going to walk in there and old Toby's going to be behind the bar cleaning the glass. I'm painting a picture. And he's going to say, man, what is that shirt well, I guess what's the hat you're wearing, this shirt you got? If I know there's Vegas bets if I'll take my shirt off during E3, but they mic me up too well. I can't do it. But maybe get a bomber jacket, you know? Look, doesn't that Tom Cruise? He's got another movie coming out where he's flying around. Don't you want to look like him, but a guy version of Tom Cruise who went to E3? And I guess he didn't go, technically. COVID and everything else. Ladies and gentlemen, there's so much more happening here. Don't worry about that. There's no way I can get the script back on track, is there? Because I'm talking about the E3 shop that you should go do too, right? Let me just go for it, all right? With more of our gaming and movies theme today, let's talk about the lines between gaming and cinema continuing to blur. Oh, Jordan Vogt Roberts, the man behind the lens directing upcoming projects Metal Gear and Gundam, sat down with the folks at Entertainment Weekly to talk about the future of these film and these IPs and these shirts that you can get and wear to the sock hops.
Hello, E3. This is Nick Romano with Entertainment Weekly magazine. Thank you so much for joining us today for a panel discussion with filmmaker Jordan Vogt Roberts. Jordan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about all things video games in E3.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to talk about. I mean, people, I think it's safe to say people mostly know you for making films like Kong Skull Island and The Kings of Summer, but you're also a major gamer. Can you talk a little bit about just your history in the gaming industry? What was sort of your big introduction?
I mean, I was just one of those kids who at a very young age, video games rewired my brain. You know, I'm the type of guy who if I walk into a room and there's a box, my first instinct is, in what combination do I need to move this box to unlock a door? Or, God forbid, if I ever walked in a room and there was like a triangular eye on the wall, I would think, I definitely need a bow right now to shoot that eye and unlock something.
We know that you're working on a movie adaptation of Metal Gear Solid. You're working on a live-action Gundam. I mean, is it safe to say that your filmmaking moving forward is sort of more inspired by video games?
You know, ironically, Metal Gear is something I've been trying to, Sisyphus push up the hill for 7+ years. That game and Kojima-san's world means the world to me. And that's something that I'm very proud of what we're doing. And I think that it is very sort of Kojima punk rock, twisty. And then Gundam likewise is, the godfather of like otaku culture in a lot of ways, without exaggeration. It is the grandfather to modern anime and thus most Japanese things that we love. It really is wild what Gundam was doing on television in an animated format in the 70s and the complexity and the weight of the stories they were telling. And so, I have a lot of things that I want to do in my career, but, those are only the kind of nerd properties that I'm attached to that are even announced. There's other game things and other IPs that I'm working on. But yeah, a big part of my driving force is to be a part of these things and to help rewrite the narrative of how people perceive these franchises and how they properly get translated and how you take a filmmaker who understands the core of what these were as you go through the process of translating the active experience of playing a game in which you can tell a story a different way because you are the protagonist versus the passive experience of watching a film. And so those aren't one-to-one translations. And so I think you really need to understand when playing a game, what it elicits from you, why it makes you feel certain ways, what the tone that it evokes is, what those real idiosyncrasies that kind of make up each game is, and how you then translate those things to the passive experience of watching a film. And so it's just something I've been obsessed with for a long time, and I feel very fortunate to be able to be a part of these projects.
In terms of Metal Gear Solid, I've documented all of your tweets about the long process of adapting this movie. I mean, what do you think it was about the original games that had such an impact on you and kept you motivated to keep this project alive?
That game came out same year, same month, basically, as Ocarina of Time. And so on a PlayStation and Nintendo level, you have, I think, two of the most seminal works in all of gaming that are going to set the groundwork moving forward for the template of how we transition into not just 2D to 3D, but then how we evolve each of these things. So yes, it's very easy to look at Metal Gear and say, oh, look how cinematic this is. But you're dealing with these characters that are walking, talking ideologies. And they all represent different slivers and ideas of, I think, this like basic question of how do we make the world whole again? And they're all trapped in the cycle of pain. And, to me, the most memorable and touching thing that still sticks with me, yes, you're transported and suddenly you're playing this movie and people are talking in acronyms and code and you're just thrust into it. And you have this incredible rogues gallery of kind of over the top, like iconic, Marvel iconic level characters. But the feeling when you kill Sniper Wolf, or when you kill a lot of bosses in that game, that up until that point in gaming, killing a boss was always viewed as a victory. And that was like, hell yeah, I'm past it. And instead, you're met with this moment of somberness and regret, and incredibly meaningful, and hit me at that exact moment in my life where like there can never be another release of a game or something that hit me at that those teenage years when I was just fully ready to just be consumed by it and transported.
So now, sort of in the timeline for you, are you moving towards the live-action Gundam movie now, or are you doing Metal Gear Solid first?
I'm waiting for the next thing to be greenlit, and whichever one that is, like I don't control when the studios choose which movie they're making when, and so I love both these things to death. I have other movies and other things that aren't IP based that I also can't wait to go and make sort of a smaller $30 million thing where I'm just going buck wild. But yeah, call up the studio and ask which green light's going to happen first.
Sounds like a plan. And I know a lot of the details, for both of these projects are kind of under lock and key. I was curious if there is anything you can sort of tease about your approach to Gundam, especially because the mythology is so vast, and it feels like you could kind of drop a pin anywhere and kind of start there.
I mean, Gundam is such a fascinating thing. Similar and dissimilar from the challenge of Metal Gear, because Gundam also is a story that they've been telling for 42 years in the Universal Century timeline. Then in addition to that, they have several other alternate timelines with other series, some that go on multiple series and movies, some that are just one-offs. And so my goal is for all of the people who might say, I don't know where to start, I want to be able to create this film and give them an access point where you can say, this is where you start. This is your entry point, where Gundam fans say, hell yeah, that is my Gundam. And yeah, it might be an amalgamation of like several of these different things, different timelines and whatnot, but this is true to what Gundam is, and this captured everything I love about Gundam. And then outsiders have this feeling of, and I feel this way about Metal Gear too, but having this sentiment of, oh, this is something that I just didn't know I wanted to be obsessed with.
Well, Jordan, with our final few minutes, I wanted to ask, because obviously it's been a crazy year for a lot of people. What does it mean for you to be back at E3, even virtually, talking about gaming again, talking about all the projects that you're working on?
E3, beyond me loving games, E3 when I was in college, me and my buddies, one of them actually kind of ran like a tech company, but we basically not fabricated, not forged, but we didn't really have any right being there, but we were able to finesse the system and get badges. And from Chicago, we all flew out to experience our first E3. Because as a kid growing up, it's just sort of this mecca, it's this fantastical place. It was my first leap of I'm going to make a documentary. And I was really fascinated by several aspects and sort of cultural tiers within E3 and how it's presented. And I never completed the documentary, but that's actually where I met a lot of these people that I still consider friends today. It literally was the year the PS3 was announced. There's just this giant banner. The slogan then was just welcome change, and the E and the change was backwards, so it was a 3. E3 actually was this really pivotal changing moment in my life where I was in Chicago making shorts. And I came out to LA, and I remember being at LAX, and I remember being at the convention center and just thinking, oh, I'm moving to LA. I feel opportunity here. This is where I'm supposed to be. You walk in the cacophony of the massive wall of sound that is the, West Hall, where you're just bombarded left to right. It really is a cacophony. It's a barrage. It's carnal sound. But it was amazing. And so it really, E3 changed me. It's the reason that I ended up moving to LA. Something about that trip made it, I never thought I'd move to LA. Something about that trip changed something in me where I said, this is where I'm supposed to be right now. And that wasn't even about video games. It just was about, here I am taking some of my first steps as a filmmaker in college, trying to make this documentary, and something just felt right. And so I've gone to so many E3 since then. My friendships and relationships, as I said, I'm fortunate for them to have grown in the game world and to be collaborating not only with developers on commercial campaigns, but also with their IPs. And so to be able to be back in even this small way, I think we're all struggling with how we reintegrate into the world right now, and what that means. We've all gone from being this is great, we're at home, we're all homebodies and recluses, to being oh my God, how do we interact with people? And so, yeah, being able to be there in just the slightest, and just for it to be a thing, it means a lot to me, because E3 really did change my life.
Well, we're so happy and honored that you could make the time today. Jordan, thank you so much. This has been a treat.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely.
As a part of Play For All, GameSpot will be bringing you the latest gaming news and announcements, interviews with developers, the biggest press conferences, and lots more. Play For All is our yearly online event that combines the excitement and announcements of E3 with charity live streams the following week, with lots of special guests who are going to help us raise money for able gamers. So join us in June for E3 and Play For All on GameSpot.com, YouTube.com/GameSpot, Twitch.tv/GameSpot, and as a part of E3's official broadcast. See you then.
篝火营地是中国领先的游戏媒体，创立于2018年，致力于为全世界的中文游戏玩家提供专业、精准、迅速的资讯情报。篝火营地立足于中国，与多家国际一流游戏媒体同行达成正式内容合作关系，源源不断地将最新鲜的游戏资讯第一时间带给全球中文游戏玩家。自成立以来，篝火营地在全网的内容浏览量已经超过5亿，服务了数百万的读者和玩家。我们的愿景是做游戏文化传播者。您可以在全球各大手机应用市场下载篝火营地 APP， 或者访问3w.gamebonfire.com 来加入游戏传播者的行列。
Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Holub. I'm a writer at Entertainment Weekly, and I am here to host a panel for this year's E3 about real-world game worlds, the differences and the ways they intersect. With me here are our panelists, Gary Whitta, screenwriter, Daniel Erickson, former creative director at BioWare, Juan Vega, narrative designer at Netflix, and Rihanna Pratchett, writer and narrative designer. Thank you guys so much for joining. Interesting fuel for this convo, and I just wanted to start out with a big basic question, which is like, how important would you say is it for video games to reflect real world events and movements? A lot has happened in the real world over the past year. I think we can all agree. My sense is that, it was all about escapism, but yeah, how would you guys kind of generally talk about the importance of making games that reflect aspects of the real world, especially as our real world is changing so much?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer in kind of a holistic way. It really depends largely on what kind of game you're setting out to make. You're right. Games have always been and remain in large part escapism. They're an escape from the real world. One of the reasons why Animal Crossing was such a hugely popular game during this pandemic year was it was like, hey, the world sucks right now, but forget about all that. Here is a very bucolic, idyllic place you can go to where everyone is your friend, and the worst thing that can happen to you is maybe you get stung by a wasp. People really responded to that offer of escapism because the world really did suck. At the same time, in the last couple of decades, we've seen video games really emerge as a legitimate art form and a legitimate platform for political and social commentary. You generally tend to see that stuff in smaller budget indie movies, and for the same reason in smaller budget indie games. If we were to do an exercise right now and think about like what are the games that that deliver really kind of make you think political and social thematics, they're going to be at the lower end of the budget scale. Whether or not video games will ever really dare to kind of tackle political and social real world kind of issues at higher budget levels is that maybe that's a question for us to talk about. But I think most of the interesting work in terms of games as an art form right now is being done at the indie level, and again for kind of monetary capitalist reasons that really aren't that difficult to figure out.
On that note, I think it's interesting that when I think about the diversity front, I don't think that everything has to have diversity as sort of a core piece for it. But what's exciting to me is it always feels like the diversity that is inherent in the artists is something that needs to come forward. And we're getting a lot more space to do that. So the grand exception to some of the concepts that Gary was talking about was working for BioWare. So BioWare had LGBTQ content all the way from the beginning, because primarily Dave Gator, who is the lead writer for Baldur's Gate, was queer. And he, right from the beginning, pushed this as, hey, I'm going to have representation in the game. We're going to have space here. We're going to have, and this was interestingly not controversial and then super controversial, and then came to the point where I just saw today that BioWare changed its logo for Gay Pride, right, for Pride Month. And there were a bunch of comments. It was like, oh, way to pander, big corporate folks. And then all the old school folks jumped in and was like, you do not know who you're talking about, right? This is a historical place. And to Gary's point, why it comes up through the indie movement mostly is because it's easier for smaller voices to come up there, is the more diverse the artists in our industry get, the more naturally we're going to get diverse representation, and we're going to get diverse stories from a more pure perspective than, hey, let's put in a bunch of diverse storylines. Now, in where I tend to work now, which is largely multiplayer, we talk a lot about representation and inclusion, which I think is subtly a different aspect, which is if I'm playing a multiplayer game, I want to be able to come and be me, whoever I am. But I think that's a different space than artistically representing the experience of a diverse group of people.
I also think from a writer's perspective, from a creative perspective, we're drawn to diversity in all forms because we want to explore the path less traveled. We don't want to tell the same stories over and again. We want to find the new experiences. We want to take audiences on new and different journeys. So I think writers and other narrative people are often push for that because it's it's just more interesting to get your teeth into.
I think, once the stories reflect what's actually happening in the real world, people will see themselves like through their favorite medium. And I think that's what really builds a connection and what gets people like really involved and interested and, hooked. It doesn't necessarily have to be in their stories. It can be in, diverse stories. It can be in like, like Rihanna said, like new things to them. But I think it's actually, I personally think it's important to, advocate for who tells the story, and when you have a diverse pool of candidates telling stories, you're going to have diverse stories, that have a lot of coverage, and it doesn't feel like it's being shoehorned in.
Do you think that kind of stuff is changing for the better in terms of people of diverse backgrounds and stuff kind of able to get to the point where they're making games, not just kind of the types of small indie games that Gary was talking about, but getting positions at bigger companies and hopefully not feeling alienated or pushed out?
I think we definitely see a movement. I think, there's definitely a lot of talent that's allowing people to tell their own stories, right? Make their own Twine games or make their own indie games or demos or vertical slices that gives them that visibility to then, jumpstart and, onto their next platform and their next bigger thing. And then we also connect and we try to uplift each other. I know that there are things like Latinx in Gaming, which is a nonprofit that I helped co-found specifically for that reason, as well as partnering with other places like Game Devs of Color and looking into other initiatives to really support everyone else that's trying to break into this field and tell their stories.
Yeah, I just want to add something to that. I think this whole conversation, we've been talking about different aspects here, but they're all really part of the same conversation. We're talking about, do games or can games accurately reflect the real world? And we're also talking about, do video game developers and publishers have diverse and inclusive staffs actually making those games? You can't have one without the other. Let's say that the next Assassin's Creed game took place during the American Civil War and you played a slave on a plantation in the deep American South. That might be a fascinating area to explore in terms of all the political and social themes that we're talking about here. But Ubisoft can never make that game until they have a team capable of making it and speaking to those issues in a way that is authentic. Like there's no way that I could tell a story like that because I haven't lived that experience. I'm not obviously talking about the historical experience, but I've never experienced racism. The only way that I could write a character like that would be mimicking what I've seen done before in other media, which inherently means I don't have anything new to bring to the conversation. It's going to feel kind of warmed over because that's what it would be.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's all about that intersectionality of like where we as humans like connect and how we evolve and work together, and where the strife comes from the drama that's inherently us being ourselves and dealing with our emotions. I think, it's super important that, we do have people in the room that are, capable and ready to tell, those stories from a personal place of authenticity. And even having them in the room doesn't necessarily always translate to that note will get hit or what you see will get done. Like I've gotten shut down for giving, Latinx feedback on something. I'm like, hey, that doesn't sound like something a Latino person would say. And, I've been told like, oh, don't worry about it. It's just a smaller note. So, just because I'm there, like, doesn't necessarily mean that, I'm always like, have my ear open and I'm trying to do the best that I can for myself, for the community, for the people that aren't in the room. I think for me, it's really about, like using that, critique, professionally trained eye and ear and other not forms of ableist language. Here I am doing it again too. Like to really test ourselves and like grow and like make sure that, we tell stories that resonate with and for everybody.
If that's what you're trying to do. And I think that's the real hard part right now is there is still a place for everybody's story. I think that's fine. I think we would much rather, speaking for myself at least, love to see a lot of authentic stories across the board than a lot of inauthentic stories that become very samey. right? That becomes flavor of the week, whatever the diversity movement that's big on the news right now, there's going to be a character that represents that, and there's going to be, right? And then everything sort of becomes this sameness, as opposed to, oh no, we've been telling a certain story for a long time. Now let's go get all the rest of the stories, but that doesn't exclude the other stories that we've been telling for a long time either.
I also think we've had a bit of a problem in the industry in all drawing from the same well sources. When I started out in the industry, I had interviews where I could just talk about Aliens or Terminator, and everyone would be, there'd be the favourite movies and things like that. Tarantino is always referenced, Tolkien. And there definitely is a need for creators to broaden their content in to produce better content out. And so, there are so many great, fantasy and futuristic writers that aren't white guys, like N.K. Jemisin or Nnedi Okorafor, or look at what the team behind Into the Motherlands is doing, which is not a video game, it's a tabletop RPG, but it's put together by a diverse team of creators. And Octavia Butler, we need to kind of diversify the sources that we're drawing from, because we're still all growing up with the same kind of movies. Most of us grew up in the 80s with the same kind of sci-fi and fantasy influences. And I think as the younger creators come up through the indie games, they're going to start drawing on more diverse sources as well, which hopefully will create more richer worlds.
How would you say that these pushes to reflect the real world affect how you approach narratives and narrative design? Seems like the kids are already kind of thinking about that stuff.
I think you get it in there in sort of small ways and subtle ways as a writer. As a freelance writer, you don't quite have that amount of power, so you're very beholden to the people you're working with, and you tend to kind of live around the edges to a degree, and it's a balancing act between getting what you want to say into the game, or even like little personal anecdotes and experiences, which I like to kind of fold into my games, kind of personal narrative Easter eggs and that kind of thing. Like my father passed away from Alzheimer's. He was interviewed about the memory he didn't want to lose, which was about the night I was born, where I think he went home from the hospital, drank half a bottle of whiskey, built some snowshoes out of tennis rackets, fell over in the snow a lot, and went to bed with a cat. And I think that I thought that was so lovely that I turned it into one of Lara's father's memories.